Alright, so hello everybody. Today I am doing a coloring tutorial on how I did this specific piece. This is not a line art tutorial, it is just a coloring tutorial. So if you're looking for something for actually how to draw, this is not it. This is just how I color my portraits. So yeah, basically what I do to start off is I just try to do base colors. So pick a color for each section of the portrait. So right now I'm doing skin, which of course is a skin tone, and I just kind of pick the color that I would like. It could be in like a natural color or a natural color, just depends on how I'm feeling. For the sake of this tutorial, I'm kind of following the colors that are in my reference photo, which is to the off of the actual drawing there on the screen. So yeah, that is what I'm doing. So I just did the skin, and now I'm doing the jacket. I am just doing them in separate layers. I work a lot with layers with my art, as you can see, if you look at the layer section on my screen. So yeah, and now I'm doing kind of the underneath clothes. So that's like the skirt and the shirt, and there's a bit of the cuff at the bottom of the jacket that I'm going to be doing a little bit later because I forgot to color it. And here's the hair. Now here is where things kind of get tricky, is when skin tones and hair tones, specifically with people who have lighter skin and lighter hair, it gets kind of tricky when you're trying to do a skin and a hair tone because you don't want them to be too similar. So what I did is I made the skin tone a bit more pink and the skin and the hair a bit more yellow and a bit kind of more desaturated and a bit darker, but not by much. So then it has somewhat of a separation between the hair and the skin. So now what I do is that after I've picked all of my colors out and I'm okay with all of the colors and how they are, I will go ahead and erase all of the extra that are outside of the lines. I just find this a lot easier than having to go through and just doing all of and going and coloring in the lines beforehand. I also just find this part very therapeutic and satisfying. It's actually one of my favorite parts of the drawing. It does take a bit of time, especially when you're doing stuff that's pretty detailed. Like if you do more detail in your line work with hair, it could be maybe a bit more tedious, but I actually don't mind it. I've learned to love the erasing process, as crazy as that sounds. It's very therapeutic, and I just kind of go along and I do that for every layer. And here I just kind of turned off the skin layer so I can actually see the difference between the hair and the skin here, because they were a bit too similar in color. I think I change the hair color later. I think I make it a bit lighter so you can see it better, but here I just turned off the skin layer so I can see where the hair is and not just leave parts of the hair on the skin. So yeah, I just do that for every single layer of the drawings. I start with the top layer and then I work my way down to the bottom one. So I did the hair first, now I'm doing the underclothes, and then it'll be the jacket and then the skin. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. If any of you want to know how I really pick my colors for my drawings, if I'm doing more of a natural portrait, so if I go through and use as close as the colors as I can from the actual reference photo, and I always use a reference photo for my portraits, I just kind of try to color match as close as I can. I don't like color pick with the color dropper thing, just because I find that your drawing can look a bit dull when you do that. It looks a bit desaturated and a bit lifeless because you're just picking colors from the photo, and obviously that's why are you even trying to just recreate the photo, you know? So you want just a little bit of, you know, a little bit of something, a little bit of your own uniqueness when it comes to color and what colors you pick and what you seems fits for your art, because what fits on cameras doesn't actually always fit with art. So it's just really your preference. And then when I'm doing portraits that have more of unnatural colors, like if the skin tone is like maybe a green and then the hair is maybe a pink, I usually try to do it where it's either two close colors and then an opposite color, so like a teal and a green and then maybe a pink or a red. Or if I'm doing just two colors, it'll maybe be a purple and a yellow. So you need that contrast, and that's kind of what I do. And if it's just a one color drawing, then I usually just work with the one color and use the values with that one color. And that's kind of how I do my drawings. So it's very kind of value based in how I separate stuff rather than less with color. And it's a very good way to learn your values and learn where your shading are and where you could put all of your shading values and where you should put each color. So necessarily if you're drawing something, you want something to, like a light thing, to be beside a dark thing. And that's kind of how values work. And especially with faces, you have a lot of shading that you need to do in clothing. Clothing is actually a lot of fun to shade. So you kind of need, that's why just doing stuff in one or two colors is actually a lot of fun. So yeah. And here I forgot to do like the color in the bottom part of the skirt, so I'm just adding that and erasing it. If this is still on the layer of the underclothes, and then I get to the, yeah, and then this is the end of the erasing, I believe. Yes, it's the end of the erasing. And then after this, I go into the face, I believe. Nope, doing the jacket cuff. There we go. There's the jacket cuff, because I forgot about it earlier. Now I go into the face. So as you can see, I left kind of like the eyes and the eyebrows and the lips kind of not colored in, and that's because I just, oh, background change color. Didn't wanted to change the background, but as I was saying, I kind of leave those out until I'm done all of the other erasing, because I like to go in and just color them in lines by hand, because they're just so small that just erasing them gets kind of annoying. So yeah, here I'm just picking the colors that I would like. So, and a tip for when you're doing eyebrows, typically eyebrows are darker than the actual hair color. So that just adds a bit of a contrast. Of course, you don't want them to be so dark that it looks really unnatural, but you know, just a touch darker usually works. So yeah, as you can see here, that it's just a slight shade, just a slight tone shift in how darker the colors are. And here I'm just doing the nostrils because I wanted the nostrils to kind of be in the same range as the skin tone, but just, of course, darker. And I just like to label my layers just because I find it a lot easier to find what I'm looking for when I'm looking for layers, rather than just having like layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. Especially because I move around in layers sometimes, so then the order just kind of gets messed up, so yeah. Oh, and I forgot to sign it, so here I am adding my signature. Changing the background once again because I don't like the color. I do this a lot in this drawing. Okay, and what I'm doing now is I'm starting to go into the coat with the pattern. I changed this later on. I actually changed the entire color of the coat. So what I'm doing right now is just kind of doesn't exist after this part because I didn't like it. I didn't like the color. I didn't like that it was really just this big block of blue and then just a little bit of red. It just felt really weird because everything else was so kind of tealy green heavy that just having these two extra colors was just didn't fit in the palette. It didn't look right. It looked odd. It looked out of place. So I changed it later on to have the jacket to just be a red with some cooler toned shading just to keep that bit of blue in there. So that's kind of what I ended up doing in the end because this just looks so weird, and there was no way in hell that I was going to do that intricate pattern of the jacket. I'm sorry, I am very lazy. That does not work. I'm not doing that. So yeah. And if you guys are wondering how I just stay in the lines, is I basically just like select the part of the layer that I want. So if I'm on the jacket layer, I select the part of the drawing that has the color for the jacket, and then I just go on and I color that, and it basically just doesn't let the color go outside of the already base color that I have. That's why I like to do the base colors first, so then I can just select them and not have to go outside of the lines for it. And this is where I realized that it really just looks like she's a multicolored Dalmatian, and I change it. There we go. There we have the red. As you can see, it just looks a bit more eye-catching because it's the greeny tail with more of the raspberry scarlet color, and I accidentally missed filming me starting the shading on the face. So here's me starting shading on the face. I start with shading and then I do blushing and then highlights, but the shading and blushing kind of mixes in between just because I like everything to kind of be smooth together. But I always start with the lighter shades of the shading and I add the darker shades as I make it darker, just because I find that it's easier to go from lighter to darker than it is to go from darker to lighter. Especially when, well, at least in my case, when it comes to shading. So that's what I like to do. And here's me adding some blush spots. Again, I just kind of follow the reference of where the shading and blush spots go. That's really all you need to kind of this. And I just take my brush and I just smooth it out as best as I can, as much as I would like. It really just depends on how drawing and how sharp or smooth I want everything. In this one, I've recently just really liked more smoother shading and facial shapes. I don't know if it's just because I always draw Aurora, which is the reference that I'm using so often, and she just has this very like smooth, angelic quality to her that she just looks odd when I have like sharper angles on her. I don't know. So yeah, I smooth this out a bit more later on after I finish the face shading. So yeah, and as you can see, I'm starting to add a bit more darker shading, blending it out more, darker shading, just making sure I get all those values right. And really just kind of follow any of the shading that you see in the photo. It's not that difficult, at least for me, to look at and just kind of follow it. When it comes to like bangs like this, I sometimes just do this like up and down motion that's kind of a zigzag, and then I blend it out to a point where you just have like enough zigzag but not a lot. And here I'm adding highlights, just the spots where again there are the highlights on the photo. You really don't want to overdo it with either the shading or the highlights, because then it'll look super contrasted and that just looks kind of bad. And here I am smoothing everything out. Fixing some of the shading now, making sure that it's the way that I like it, that it looks good and not weird. And here I am going through and just kind of smoothing it all out, making sure that I like how smooth it is and how much contrast I like. See if the values are correct. And now I'm starting to shade the jacket. And here I kind of went a bit cooler for the shading, just because I felt like it fit it better rather than going for a bright scarlet. And again, same as with the face, I kind of just follow the reference and the shading lines that I add. I always like to add crease lines. I find that it just helps me and defines more of where the shadows are. That's kind of how I like to do my shadows. So when it comes to, again with the face, when it comes to this, I like to block out the colors first and then kind of blend them out better to get all together, because I find that it just works better in my opinion rather than going each section and then blending it out. I find that it works better, it looks better, at least for my stuff that I do. That's how I like to work. That, and I'm also just super lazy, so. And here I am just adding a bit of a darker shade into where that crease is under the arm, because that looks like a very dark spot in the reference photo, as you can see. And I kind of just do that right for the rest of the jacket. It's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of any like special techniques that I use. It's just put down color and blend. And here I am starting to smooth out all of the shadows. I kind of work piece by piece, making sure that they're the smoothed out way that I like. Making sure that there's not very harsh edges, but it's also not too smoothed out that you can't see any of it. And I did not film me putting the highlights on because it's basically the same thing. I put down the color and I blend out. That's kind of it, really, for clothing. I have a lot of fun actually doing clothing. I like doing fabric. I found it very therapeutic and easy. Here what I'm doing is that instead of hand drawing a pattern, I'm doing a paint effect, as they're called on here, but they're really just patterns that you can just put on your drawing on different layers. Here I'm doing a lace pattern to kind of simulate how everything is in the reference photo, but not having to do it by hand. So here I'm just kind of figuring everything out, how I like the effect, basically how much of the effect I like, the opacity of everything, how big I want it, how small I want it. And this next thing is me adding some blue shadows to the jacket. So as you can see, I started a new layer and I'm just going over roughly the spots where I put the shading of the jacket before. this is kind of not like, this isn't really a step that you have to do. It's really just something I've been starting to go through, is adding shadows on a different layer and kind of blending them out and overlaying them onto the artwork below. It's something that I've recently just started doing, and I really like the effect that it has. I think that you can achieve a lot with it, but I am by no means a master of it. I'm not even a master of portrait work or digital work. I've only really been drawing digital portraits since about December, January. So it's only been maybe about 8 months. So by no means am I an expert on everything. By no means am I an expert on portraits or anatomy. But yeah, here I am just smoothing out all of the blue shading. And it's not as smoothed out as the regular shading underneath. It's a bit more rougher just because this is going to be overlaid over it, so it's not going to be this bright of a blue. It's kind of going to blend more into the shadows. As you can see, here I am adding a, I guess, mode, as they're called on this program. It's basically like overlay, multiply, screen, add, lighten or darken, all that kind of stuff. I believe I choose screen in the end as the mode. So because I think I liked it more than multiply because it added a bit more of the blue tint to it, and I just dimmed down the opacity so then the blue wasn't as prominent. And here I am figuring out the lace texture because I'm adding the exact same lace texture, the exact same size, and everything to this. So I'm really just trying to figure out which lace pattern I'd use because I completely forgot. But in hindsight, I could have actually just checked on the layer underneath as to which one it is. By the way, it is Lace 03 that I used. And a lot of these paint effects that I have are custom. I downloaded kind of a package that has some brushes and effects in it, and I've just kind of been using them. Oh, did I use multiply and not screen? I think I might, yeah, I used multiply and not screen. Okay, well I used multiply and not screen. And right now I'm just finagling with the size of my space. And now I'm finishing up the rest of the skin with the torso and the hands. I'm really just, again, following the shape of the body, the shading of the body, and everything that it is in the reference. And I'm just using the same techniques as I did before. I honestly really hate just drawing hands. Hands and feet are the bane of my existence. They always end up looking either like oven mitts or like lobster claws or just alien fingers. I don't know. These ones aren't too bad because it's not the whole hand, they're like in a fist, which is a bit easier, but I always find that the shading is just a bit more difficult because there's always like folds and wrinkles and things like that, and like bones and veins, and it's just, it's a mess when I color them. I always hate coloring hands or feet. This hand actually didn't turn out too bad. The anatomy looks pretty solid. I didn't really like how the shading turned out in the hands, but I kind of got fed up with it and was like, well, I'm not really going to change it now because I'm so far into this and I'm not going to be able to do any more than I've already done, so yeah. Again, I'm just following really the same techniques that I used in the face, which is going from lightest shading to darkest shading, smoothing everything out to the way that I like it. And yeah. And here I am moving on to the skirt and shirt portion of the clothing. This was actually pretty easy because there's not a lot of it showing, so it didn't take as much time as the jacket did. I just always love how AURORA, who is the singer that I am drawing at the moment, just combines outfits. I don't know, but when I think of her, I always think of like scarlet red, like deep, like purple and teal, and maybe a bit of blue. Like those are the colors that I just feel are her colors whenever I listen to her or whenever like I'm drawing her. Like those are her colors. Those are the colors that I really associate with her. And I find that a lot of the times when I'm drawing her, I use those colors just because they're her colors. Which is why I liked this photo a lot, because it kind of incorporated that blue, that red, that teal. The photo just really captured me, especially this entire like photo shoot with this outfit. It was she just has a way of posing and a way of making herself look so like effortlessly beautiful. And I really like how she matches outfits. It's amazing. With this shirt, it was a bit different because in the photo, it kind of goes from like a teal to like a green, so I had to kind of change hues. Not by much, but by a bit, just to add a bit more warmth into the top of it, which I'm guessing is kind of the light reflecting from the inside of the jacket and the face and hair kind of going onto the shirt. Always remember to save. And here I am starting on the hair. Hair has kind of been a tricking thing for me, as it's a bit difficult for me to draw. I've kind of gotten to a point where I have a bit of a technique. So basically what I do is I put down some shading in it, where like the big parts of the shading are, and I smooth those out, as you can see, as what I'm doing here. And this isn't really like done super precisely. It's kind of a little bit messy, a little bit rough, just because I'm going to shade it out anyways, and I'm going to add more stuff on top of it. So here I am adding the darker part to the hair, which is the underneath part. And now I'm doing kind of what I do with hair, is I kind of follow the photo and follow the shape of the hair as to and adding strands. Now I don't like go like too very detailed into it. I just kind of add a few bigger chunks and smaller chunks just to emulate the pieces of hair and strands of hair. And I do different lights and darks and widths of the size of the brush that I'm doing, just to add a bit of a variation so it doesn't just look like one big giant glob. And now moving on to kind of more of the facial details. here I am kind of adding a bit of shading to the eye whites. There isn't much to do because you don't really see them. And I'm just adding a bit of detail into the eyes here. I kind of always do this for portraits, even though sometimes you don't even see it. I just think that it adds a bit of interest and a bit of a secret if you zoom in. And lips are something, again, that I struggle with, and I completely forgot to, record it. But that is I basically just shade lips the same way that I do the rest of the portrait. I like skin. And with the eyebrows, I just kind of added strands the same way that I did with the hair. And here I am just kind of coloring the lines on her face, kind of the same shade as the jacket, just to make it a bit more cohesive. And I'm adding some eye highlights to add that nice spark of life. And I'm just adding a bit of a texture to the background, just to add a bit of, I don't know, just a bit of, interest to the portrait, because, I don't know, I just kind of felt like it needed that. And I just kind of save it on the highest setting that I can. That's a good file size. And here is the final product. So yeah, that is how I do my work. Thanks for watching. Bye.